Hello and welcome to the News by Standards. Women who lose babies during pregnancy have been promised improved care, including better ways for remains to be collected and stored with dignity. The government will also introduce a voluntary certificate for parents who lose their baby before 24 weeks. The commitments come in response to an independent review of care in England. In the past, women have been told to retrieve baby lost remains from toilets and store them in home fridges. As part of new measures focusing on women's health, the NHS website will also be updated to include more content on hormone replacement therapy and to allow people to search for the local availability of in vitro fertilisation treatment, or IVF. Officials acknowledged the work of BBC presenter Naga Chetty and patient groups to raise awareness of the painful womb condition, adenomyosis, and said they would provide more information online. The separate independent pregnancy loss review made 73 recommendations for improving care for people who experience baby loss before 24 weeks. There are around 500 miscarriages a day in the UK, defined as a loss of a pregnancy before 24 weeks. For many women, this happens at home with little support or pain relief. Jessica Wharton, aged 28, an English tutor from Wythenshawe, had 2 early pregnancy losses last year. She says the lack of acknowledgement of her losses left her feeling heartbroken. She said, apart from us as a couple and our friends and family, no one really acknowledged our loss. When I asked the hospital for something to acknowledge them, they said they couldn't do that. We felt the baby was part of us and we had tried for a long time. This was still our child. She said her experiences would have been improved by staff being more empathetic, more available to listen to her and to tell her what to expect. A year later, it is still very raw. We are trying to take each day as it comes and hold them in our hearts. While babies born after 24 weeks gestation are officially recorded as stillbirths, there is currently no formal way to mark losses before this time. The government says a voluntary certificate would be made available from October, and while not a legal document, would help provide comfort and help patients validate their loss. Commitments include beginning to explore how women who have experienced baby loss can get 24/7 access to care and how those experiencing multiple miscarriages receive treatment and testing, developing and creating a bespoke holder to allow remains to be collected and stored with due dignity. The independent review said early loss was commonly viewed as a clinical episode, with some healthcare professionals not taking individuals' emotional and physical care seriously. The co-lead of the review, Zoe Clark-Coates, who is also a baby loss charity founder, said that after losing 5 babies herself, she saw that proper support did not exist. I want to see people stopping having to hit Google to find out what care should I be receiving, where should I be going for support. This support should be easily available to every single person, she said. She told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that changing the language around baby loss was essential. I absolutely will always call miscarriages baby losses. It's really important to acknowledge that. She added that baby loss affected whole families and was not just a woman's issue. Nobody is left untouched by the tragedy. Other recommendations in the review include education in schools on the symptoms of all types of baby loss and where to seek help, routine offers of mental health support for women and partners, support to understand why the loss occurred with appointments and advice for future pregnancies, private spaces in hospitals for patients experiencing baby loss, further research on the increased risk for women from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds and people from more deprived areas. Ms Caulfield, Minister for Women's Health, said, "We will keep working and investing so girls and women across the country can benefit from the world-class healthcare they deserve." She told Sky News that the government was ending the 3 miscarriage rule, under which women are referred for help and advice only after they have lost 3 babies during pregnancies. Welsh legend Sir Tom Jones has questioned the decision to stop choirs from singing his song Delilah before Welsh rugby matches. It was announced in February the song would no longer be sung by choirs at Cardiff's Principality Stadium. The 1968 hit has been controversial because of its references to a woman's murder by her jealous partner. The 1968 hit has been controversial because of its references to a woman's murder by her jealous partner. Before playing the song, Sir Tom told the crowd at Cardiff Castle on Friday the band could not stop fans singing it. You can't stop us singing Delilah, he was heard to say. Can you imagine who was the man who didn't want us to sing Delilah? He stopped the choir from singing, but he didn't stop the crowd from singing it, and we will keep singing it too. Delilah was removed from the playlist of rugby choirs in 2015 and was officially banned earlier this year, prompting a debate on depictions of violence against women. At the time, the Principality Stadium said Delilah will not feature on the playlist for choirs for rugby internationals at Principality Stadium. Guest choirs have also more recently been requested not to feature the song during their pre-match performances and throughout games. The Welsh Rugby Union, or WRU, condemns domestic violence of any kind. We have previously sought advice from subject matter experts on the issue of censoring the song, and we are respectfully aware that it is problematic and upsetting to some supporters because of its subject matter. Rail strikes are expected to disrupt family holiday travel as many schools across England and Wales break up for the 6-week summer holidays. Members of 2 rail unions are currently involved in industrial action at train operating companies. The action is part of their ongoing dispute about pay and conditions. Strikes are to be held on Saturday the 22nd of July and Saturday the 29th of July. Members of the RMT union will be taking action at 14 rail companies. These listed are Avanti West Coast, C2C, Chiltern Railways, Cross Country, East Midlands Railway, GTR, Great Western Railway, Greater Anglia, LNER, Northern Trains, South Eastern, South Western Railway, TransPennine Express, West Midlands Trains, and GTR operating Southern, Thameslink, Great Northern and Gatwick Express. Greater Anglia includes Stansted Express. When will some of these train strikes run? The RMT says 20,000 of its members, including guards, train managers and station staff, will walk out. On previous strike days, there have been thousands of cancellations, with some lines not operating at all. On lines where there have been services, they have tended to start later and finish earlier than normal. National Rail has said passengers should expect large areas of the rail network to have little or no services and should check with the operator before travelling. What action are train drivers taking? Members of ASLEF are taking industrial action short of a strike in the form of an overtime ban. Most train companies rely on drivers working overtime to run their full schedules. Saturday the 22nd of July marks the last day of one overtime ban, but services will be disrupted again from Monday the 31st of July to Saturday the 5th of August. Many train operators will reduce their service levels. Why have railway workers been on strike? Unions say any pay offer should reflect their rising cost of living, with the inflation rate only recently having dipped below 10%. But the rail industry is under pressure to save money after the pandemic left a hole in its finances. Bosses say reforms need to be agreed to afford pay increases and modernise the railway. What about tube strikes? Currently, London Underground workers have called off their strikes from Sunday the 23rd of July until Friday the 28th of July, after a major step forward in talks. 3 unions have been due to walk out in a long-running dispute about pensions, job cuts and working conditions. How much are rail workers paid? The average salary of rail workers in 2022 was £45,919, according to the Office for National Statistics, ONS. If drivers are excluded because they tend to be members of the ASLEF union, not RMT, it estimates this at £39,318. However, the RMT union said that figure was far too high, because it does not include rail cleaning staff. The ONS says median pay for train and tram drivers is just under £59,000. Although ASLEF members tend to be better paid than other rail workers, Mick Whelan, General Secretary of the union, told BBC News on the 12th of May that train drivers haven't had a pay rise for 4 years. He was just referring to the ones who are taking industrial action. That's because a new pay deal has not been reached since their last agreement ended in 2019. However, Transport Minister Hugh Merriman said the pay of train drivers has gone up by 39% since 2011, the highest increase of any employment group. He's right about the 39% increase, but we have not been able to establish whether it's the highest increase for any employment group. That's because of changes to the way the figures have been released over the last decade. What deal have rail workers been offered? The Rail Delivery Group, or RDJ, which represents the 14 train companies, made an offer that would have been seen by rail workers to have received a backdated pay rise of 5% in 2022. It would then negotiate reforms ahead of a second year's pay rise with individual operators. On the 5th of May, RMT members voted to extend the strike mandate for another 6 months. The ASLEF union, meanwhile, has rejected a 2-year offer, which would see drivers get a backdated pay rise of 4% for 2022 and a 4% increase this year. Separately, a revised offer from Network Rail was accepted by RMT members on the 20th of March, ending that dispute. The union said the offer amounted to an uplift on salaries of between 14.4% for the lowest paid grades to 9.2% for the highest paid. And how much notice do unions have to give? Unions are obliged under the law to give at least 14 days notice of any strike action. Labour's mixed fortunes in this week's by-elections have brought into sharper focus underlying differences on policy. The Labour leadership see their spectacular win in Selby and Ainsty, a former Tory stronghold, as a sign that trust is being rebuilt and an endorsement of its strategy of not promising more than it can deliver. But some critics say the failure to take Uxbridge and South Ruislip suggests Labour's big national opinion poll lead has more to do with disillusionment with the government than enthusiasm for change. Behind closed doors this weekend, there will be calls for the party to adopt more distinctive policies. The Labour leadership has insisted that it won't make uncosted spending commitments ahead of the next general election, and that it won't be afraid to make hard choices. But at a meeting of the party's policy-making body this weekend in Nottingham, they will be pushed to make more spending commitments. The National Policy Forum consists of ordinary party members, representatives from the trade unions and members of the shadow cabinet, and there are some issues where an alliance of major unions and party members will attempt to force change. The provision of free school meals for all primary school children is a policy favoured across the Labour spectrum. Last week, Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner said that while she would love to give all kids free meals, there isn't an endless supply of money. She said that school breakfast clubs were the priority, but the leadership has been under pressure with the Labour supporting a Mirror newspaper and the National Education Union, which does not have formal links to the party, mounting campaigns for free meals. So there is a proposed change to a draft policy document which calls on the National Party to build on Labour in London and Wales by providing free school meals for all primary school children. The benefit caps. This is an issue backed by the largest UK union, Unison. The union too is posing a further policy change to the leadership by attempting to insert a lifting of the 2 children limit in the benefits system. The Policy Forum attempts to achieve consensus, with shadow cabinet members talking face-to-face with those who want to see the policy changed. Should they fail to reach agreement, it takes just over a third, or 35%, of delegates who want to see a change to move the issue to the annual party conference, potentially highlighting internal divisions. But they understand that discussions have been held between party officials and Unison representatives to try to diffuse any rows. The difficulty for the leadership is that their critics on these issues are not just the usual suspects on the party's left, so the pressure for change is greater. And on the benefit system, former Shadow Cabinet Minister John Trickett asked the House of Commons Library to calculate how much it would cost to lift the current 2 children limit. It suggested around £1.4 billion. In terms of nationalisation, Labour has allocated £2 billion. Of the anticipated £3.2 billion, it will raise by taxing wealthy non-doms. That potentially leaves almost enough to meet the cost of that change to the benefit system. So the argument from some in Labour's ranks is not for uncosted policies, it is that more policies must be agreed and costed. The left-wing group Momentum is running a campaign to lobby delegates to back more radical policies. These include rent controls. There may be a compromise which would allow regional mayors to impose them. The group is also calling for the nationalisation of energy and water companies. It is a priority for Labour's biggest union funder, Unite, to bring energy into public ownership. Momentum also wants a commitment to a £15 an hour minimum wage inscribed in Labour's official policy documents. They also want a commitment to reinstate the International Development Department, which has been folded into the Foreign Office, and to meet the aid target of 0.7% of GDP, or gross domestic product. Some amendments, mostly, though not entirely, from supporters of the leadership, have been agreed even before this weekend's meeting gets underway. These include making it clear a Labour government would scrap the Home Office's Rwanda scheme, and improving early years education and renationalising rail. In terms of non-negotiables, however, if the leadership is defeated on any issues, it will have two get-out clauses. First, the National Policy Forum draws up the official policy programme, but this isn't the same as the manifesto. There is a further meeting to agree that, and some policies won't make the cut. Second, there will be wording in the agreed policy documents which will say Labour's fiscal rules are non-negotiable. They will apply to every decision taken by a Labour government, with no exceptions. So if Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves believes an agreed policy is unaffordable, it won't happen. But the more immediate priority will be to try to show united fronts, even though the hard choices on spending are proving uncomfortable for some party members and unions alike. A festival in Malaysia has been cancelled after British singer Matt Healy attacked the country's anti-LGBT laws. During the performance by his band The 1975 at the Good Vibes Festival, Healy addressed the audience in a profanity-laden speech before kissing bass player Ross McDonald. The band then ended their set, claiming officials ordered them off stage. Homosexuality is illegal in Malaysia and punishable by 20 years in prison. The band were headlining the Good Vibes Festival in the capital Kuala Lumpur on Friday. On Saturday, the festival's organisers said the remaining schedule for the festival had been cancelled following the controversy. A statement said the decision came after an immediate cancellation directive from Malaysia's Ministry of Communications and Digital as part of its unwavering stance against any parties that challenge, ridicule or contravene Malaysian laws. In footage shared online, Healy could be seen telling the crowd that the band's decision to appear in Malaysia had been a mistake. When we were booking shows, I wasn't looking into it, Healy said. I don't see the point I do not see the point of inviting the 1975 to a country and then telling us who we can be with. Unfortunately, you don't get a set of loads of uplifting songs because I'm very furious, the frontman continued, and that's not fair on you, because you're not representative of your government, because you're young people, and I'm sure a lot of you are in a progressive and cool mindset. Healy and MacDonald then kissed as the band played the song I Like America and America Likes Me. Soon after, just 30 minutes into the set, Healy and the band walked off stage with the singer telling the audience, "Alright, we just got banned from Kuala Lumpur, see you later." A source close to the 1975 confirmed of the incident. Matty has a long-time record of advocating for the LGBTQ+ community, and the band wanted to stand up to their LGBTQ+ fans and community, the source said on Friday night. In an initial statement to local media on Friday, festival organisers said the band's set was stopped due to non-compliance with local performance guidelines, but at that stage they said the festival would continue as scheduled for the rest of the weekend. Malaysia's Communications Minister Fahmi Fadzil hit out at the band's performance on Twitter, calling it very disrespectful. He added that he had contacted festival organisers and asked them to provide a full report. Healy has previously used appearances on stage to highlight anti-LGBT laws. In 2019, he invited a male fan on stage during a gig in Dubai to hug him before sharing an interaction. The incident attracted criticism in the country where homosexuality is punishable by 10 years imprisonment. Posting on Twitter after the show, Healy said, "Thank you Dubai, you were so amazing. I don't think we're allowed to be back due to my behaviour, but know that I love you and I wouldn't have done anything differently given the chance again." Other performers at the Good Vibes Festival include The Strokes, Dermot Kennedy and T.Y. Tiny Dollar Sign. A new photograph of a smiling Prince George has been released in celebration of his 10th birthday on Saturday. The picture shows George, who is second in line to the throne, sitting on a set of steps at Windsor. In a change of tradition, it was taken by Millie Pilkington rather than George's mother, the Princess of Wales, who has often photographed her children for past birthdays. Miss Pilkington had photographed Prince Louis for his 5th birthday in April. Prince George has just finished his first year at his new school, Lambrook School in Berkshire. He started there with his siblings Charlotte and Louis last September following the family's move to Windsor. His first few weeks of the summer holidays have been eventful, with a visit to the Royal Box at Wimbledon last Sunday to watch Carlos Alcaraz win the title against Novak Djokovic, where he was pictured alongside his parents and sister Charlotte, 8. A few days earlier, George and his younger siblings privately visited an air show at RAF Fairford, Gloucestershire, and at the start of the month he was pictured with his father at the Ashes cricket at Lord's. George was born on the 22nd of July 2013 at St Mary's Hospital in London, weighing 8 pounds 6 ounces or 3.8 kilograms. Children aged 10 and 11 will be able to use passport e-gates at the UK border from Monday, after the government announced a change to the rules. Currently, only eligible children aged 12 and above can use the e-gates, which are at 15 air and rail ports. The change comes after successful trials at Gatwick, Stansted and Heathrow, the government said. It comes as families embarking on summer holiday getaways were hit by traffic jams and delays on Friday. Passenger volumes are expected to return to 2019 levels this summer, with some ports exceeding those volumes, the government said. Border Force expects to see over 34 million air arrivals coming through UK passport control over the coming months. More than 400,000 children aged 10 and 11 are expected to use e-gates this year. The gates are installed at 13 airports in the UK. These include Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted, London City, Luton, Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, East Midlands, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Manchester and Newcastle. They are also in use at UK border controls at the Eurostar terminals in Brussels and Paris. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick said the rollout will make travelling easier for passengers and strengthens the security of the UK borders. The UK processes more passengers through e-gates than any other country, and today's announcement ensures we remain at the forefront of technology, he added. But the e-gate service has run into difficulties in the past, with airports across England and Scotland caught in lengthy queues when the gates stopped working at the end of May. The disruption, which lasted for over a day, was caused by an IT issue, the Home Office has said. It saw travellers waiting in long queues for hours. On Friday, the Port of Dover said it had been a popular day with travellers heading to France. Earlier, it had warned holidaymakers to expect delays to pass border controls, with processing times given of up to 90 minutes. Families were also hit by traffic jams and delays at the Dartford crossing. National Highways closed part of the River Thames crossing because of a crash on Friday, causing long tailbacks. The smash forced the closure of one of the crossing's 2 tunnels, which are used for northbound traffic, shortly before 7 AM British Standard Time. The tunnel was later reopened, but National Highways said the incident caused 5 miles of congestion. An estimated 12.6 million car journeys will be made for a day trip or holiday between Friday and Monday, as the majority of schools in England and Wales finish for the summer, the RAC said. Earlier this week, the first passports were issued in King Charles' name. Passports will now use the wording His Majesty, with the era finally ending for passports using Her Majesty, for the late Queen Elizabeth II. The updated passports are the latest stage in the gradual transition in reigns, with stamps and some coins now carrying the King's head. Banknotes will begin to change next year. Virginia Woolf's personal copy of her debut novel, The Voyage Out, has been fully digitised for the first time. The book was discovered in 2021, having mistakenly been housed in the science section of the University of Sydney Library for 25 years. It is the only publicly available copy of its kind and contains rare inscriptions and edits. Another UK first edition used personally by Woolf is owned by a private collector based in London. Scholars say the find is remarkable and could provide insight into the English author's mental health and writing process. Woolf is considered to be one of the most important modernist 20th century authors, publishing more than 45 works, including To the Lighthouse and Miss Dalloway. She pioneered the use of stream of consciousness as a narrative device, and is a lasting literary influence to this day. The University of Sydney hopes by publicly sharing their copy, the multiple notes showing the adopted and abandoned revisions will give a new generation of readers, literary students and scholars some insight into Woolf's thoughts. Woolf suffered from severe mental health breakdowns during the estimated 7-year period it took to complete The Voyage Out. She fell back into depression and was put in a nursing home the day before it was published in 1915. Staying there for 6 months, her husband Leonard Woolf said she was writing every day with a kind of tortured intensity to finish the novel. She was institutionalized and attempted suicide several times throughout her life. She died in March 1941, aged 59, after filling her coat pockets with stones and walking into the River Ouse. The University of Sydney said it appeared the rediscovered copy of The Voyage Out had been lost through the bustle of everyday campus and library life. Simon Cooper, Metadata Services Officer from the Fisher Library, found the book incorrectly shelved in 2021. He said, "I knew the book didn't belong there, so I took it out and then saw the author's name handwritten on the first page. So I looked up her handwriting to compare it, and it matched. It's her copy." The university acquired the book in the late 1970s through Bow Windows Bookshop in Lewes, East Sussex. Woolf and her husband Leonard Woolf had lived in the area, and members of the public can still visit their 16th century country retreat, Monk's House, which is owned by the National Trust. Original copies of her manuscripts, novels, essays and short stories now sell for huge sums. One of the world's oldest antiquarian booksellers, Mags Bros in London, told the BBC the rediscovered Woolf copy could be worth around £250,000, given the other first edition copy sold for just over £91,000 in 2001. Prices have substantially increased for this material since then, in some places quite substantially, said Bonnie Beaumont, modern first specialist at Mags Bros. In the rediscovered edition of The Voyage Out, handwritten edits made by Woolf can be seen in blue and brown pencil, with typed excerpts pasted onto the pages. Some of the changes could have been made by an editor or someone else. Academics say the rare text reflects Woolf's understanding of her own process of writing and how she developed the craft. It carries iconic value, said to Mark Byron, a professor of modern literature at the University of Sydney, who has studied the book in person. The revisions are fascinating in terms of what Woolf was thinking at the time, he added. Its role in Woolf's editorial decisions towards the first American edition of the novel in 1920 is an important element of its textual history. The inclusion of Woolf's annotations and corrections in her own hand, in pasted typed sheets, and in marginal editorial instructions make this a unique object, shining a light on the composition processes of a pivotal novel in Woolf's career, and thus in the history of the novel in the 20th century. He added that the difficult composition of the novel led to the first significant adult breakdown for Woolf, suggesting the subject matter and narrative technique deployed in the novel may shed some light on matters of psychology and mental distress and its connection to Woolf's emergent career as a writer. Some have speculated that Woolf was potentially uncomfortable with how closely the reflections mirrored her own mental health when she was writing the book, which is what led to the changes. Most of Woolf's works are housed at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, and the Burr Collection at the New York Public Library. Many have long believed that the other first edition of The Voyage Out, owned by Woolf, was held in an undisclosed private collection in the United States. It is known as the Adams copy as it used to be part of a library belonging to a Mr. F.B. Adams. However, the BBC has learned that the Adams copy is in London and owned by a private British collector. He acquired it through the rare book dealer Peter Harrington at an auction held by Sotheby's in 2001. Peter Harrington's son, Pom, who now runs the business, said he was excited by the rediscovery and digitalisation of The Voyage Out, and keen to examine the difference between the two copies. A football match has been called off in chaos after a funeral hearse and a car were driven onto the pitch. The friendly between Dunstan and Gateshead was abandoned at half-time amid extraordinary scenes which stunned watching supporters. Footage posted on social media showed the vehicles being driven in circles in the centre of the pitch. Two men who witnessed said they were masked, then climbed out of the hearse and into the car and left the ground. Gateshead FC fan Archie said the intruders apparently barged through the gate from the car park, then broke through the railings along the edge of the pitch. He said posters were thrown out the car's window in an apparent protest before two people in ski masks jumped out of the hearse and into the silver car and drove off. The posters included a number of personal allegations about two individuals. Matty Hewitt, a football writer at the Newcastle Chronicle, said Northern Premier League club Dunstan's UTC Stadium was evacuated as a police helicopter circled overhead following the incident. Two cars driven onto the pitch with masked men getting out and leaving a hearse on the pitch, he tweeted, describing it as a terrifying experience with plenty of children about. Gateshead FC said due to an incident on the pitch occurring shortly after half-time, tonight's match has been abandoned by the referee. Northumbria Police said no one was reported to have been injured or threatened, and they had launched an investigation. A spokesman said disorder will not be tolerated in the community and anyone found to be involved will be dealt with robustly. While inquiries are at an early stage, it's believed that those involved are known to each other and there was no wider risk to the public. We are also aware that images and videos of the disturbances are being circulated on social media. Members of the public are urged not to speculate and are encouraged to share any footage with police to assist their investigation. Police remain in the area to carry out inquiries and offer reassurance to the public, and those with concerns are encouraged to speak with an officer on duty. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has sacked his country's ambassador to the UK. Vadim Prystaiko had recently criticised the president's response to a row over gratitude for British military aid. He had called Mr Zelensky's promise to thank the UK Defence Minister every morning unhealthy sarcasm. Kiev gave no official reason for the dismissal, but confirmed that Mr Prystaiko was no longer ambassador. Earlier this month, Ben Wallace said he had warned Ukraine that its allies were not Amazon, saying Kiev needed to show gratitude for weapons it received in order to persuade Western politicians to give more. He was speaking at the NATO summit after President Zelensky criticised the military alliance for delays in making Ukraine a member. Mr Wallace's remarks had stirred anger in Kiev, and he later said his words had been somewhat misrepresented. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reacted by saying he had been struck by how much Ukraine valued the UK's support. How else can we show our gratitude, Mr Zelensky said in response to the Defence Minister's comments. We can wake up in the morning and thank the Minister, let him write to me and tell me how to thank him. Mr Prystaiko said last week there had been a little bit of sarcasm in his president's response, which he believed was unhealthy. We're not expecting anybody to fight for us, we only ask for equipment, he said, adding, Ben can call me and tell me anything he wants. He had been in his post in London since 2020, but on Friday Mr Zelensky issued a presidential decree announcing his sacking, saying he had also been removed as Ukraine's representative to the International Maritime Organization. Former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson tweeted that he was sad to say goodbye to Mr Prystaiko, calling him a great Ukrainian ambassador and friend to his country. In a separate development, the first road to be officially named after President Zelensky in the UK was unveiled in Harlow, a town just north of London. Mr Prystaiko was due to be at the event on Friday morning, where 5th Avenue was renamed Zelensky Avenue, but the ambassador was fired as he was in the car on the way to the Essex town, it is understood. The president's name is officially spelt with a double Y, but the single Y spelling is now widely used. Only last week Mr Prystaiko was spotted watching the Wimbledon Tennis Championship in the Royal Box, when Ukraine's Alina Svitolina was knocked out in the ladies' singles semi-final. President Zelensky has fired ambassadors before, dismissing 5 at once a year ago in what was seen as a reshuffle, but it was the controversial ambassador to Germany Andrei Belenk whose sacking was particularly notable. Known for his outspoken social media presence, he had become a familiar face in Germany with repeated appeals for military aid to Ukraine. However, he was seen to have stepped out of line when he accused Chancellor Olaf Scholz of acting like a sulky liver sausage when the German leader was slow to take up a presidential invitation to visit Kiev. This is about the most brutal war of extermination since the Nazi invasion of Ukraine. It's not kindergarten, complained Mr Belenk, who is now Ukraine's deputy foreign minister. Visitors to Dorset's Jurassic Coast have been warned about after a large section of cliff collapsed into a beach. The overnight landslip occurred at Seatown Beach near West Bay, along the same section of coastline as another collapse in 2021. Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service urged walkers to stay away from cliff edges and don't sit at the base of the cliffs. It added there was a greater risk of cliff falls due to recent dry weather. Dorset Council also issued a warning that said the slips continued to move and were still dangerous to walk over. It said the latest landslip seemed to be another movement of the older slip material. This movement may leave the remaining vertical faces even more vulnerable to further collapse now, especially where any remaining cracks are still present, the council added. The authority said it would continue to monitor these and other active cliffs along the Jurassic Coast. A series of climate records on temperature, ocean heat and Antarctica sea ice have alarmed some scientists who say their speed and timing is unprecedented. Dangerous heat waves in Europe could break further records, the UN says. It is hard to immediately link these events to climate change because weather and oceans are so complex. Studies are underway, but scientists already fear some worst-case scenarios are unfolding. I'm not aware of a similar period when all parts of the climate system were in record-breaking or abnormal territory, Thomas Smith, an environmental geographer at London School of Economics, says. The Earth is in charted territory now due to global warming from burning fossil fuels, as well as heat from the first El Nino, a warming and natural weather system, since 2018, says Imperial College London climate science lecturer Dr. Paolo Seppi. Here are 4 climate records broken so far this summer: the hottest day on record, the hottest June on record globally, extreme marine heat waves, record low Antarctic sea ice, and what they tell us. The world experienced its hottest day ever recorded in July, breaking the global average temperature record set in 2016. Average global temperatures topped 17 centigrade for the first time, reaching 17.08 centigrade on the 6th of July, according to EU climate monitoring service Copernicus. Ongoing emissions from burning fossil fuels like oil, coal and gas are behind the planet's warming trend. This is exactly what was forecast to happen in a world warmed by more than greenhouse gases, said climate scientist Dr. Frederique Otto from Imperial College London. Humans are 100% behind the upward trend, she says. If I'm surprised by anything, it's that we're seeing the records broken in June, so earlier in the year. El Nino normally doesn't really have a global impact until 5 or 6 months into the phase, Dr. Smith says. El Nino is the world's most powerful naturally occurring climate fluctuation. It brings warmer water to the surface in the tropical Pacific, pushing warmer air into the atmosphere. It normally increases global air temperatures. The average global temperature in June this year was 1.47 centigrade above the typical June in the pre-industrial period. Humans started pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere when the Industrial Revolution started around 1800. Asked if summer 2023 is what he would have forecasted a decade ago, Dr. Smith says that climate models are good at predicting long-term trends, but less good at forecasting the next 10 years. Models from the 1990s pretty much put us where we are today, but to have an idea about what the next 10 years would look like exactly would be very difficult, he says. Things aren't going to cool down. The average global ocean temperature has smashed records for May, June and July. It is approaching the highest sea surface temperature ever recorded, which was in 2016, but it is extreme heat in the North Atlantic Ocean that is particularly alarming scientists. We've never ever had a marine heat wave in this part of Atlantic. I had not expected this, says Daniela Schmidt, Professor of Earth Sciences at the University of Bristol. In June, temperatures off the west coast of Ireland were between 4 and 5 centigrade above average, which the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration classified as a Category 5 heatwave or beyond extreme. Directly attributing this heatwave to climate change is complex, but that work is ongoing, Professor Schmidt says. What is clear is that the world has warmed and the oceans have absorbed most of that heat from the atmosphere. Our models have naturally variability in them, and there are still things appearing that we have not envisaged, or at least not yet. She emphasises the impact of this heat on marine ecosystems, which produce 50% of the world's oxygen. People tend to think about trees and grasses dying when we talk about heat waves. The Atlantic is 5 degrees warmer than it should be. That means organisms need 50% more food just to function as normal. The area covered by sea ice in the Antarctic is at record lows for July. There is an area around 10 times the size of the UK missing, compared with the 1981 to 2010 average. Alarm bells are ringing for scientists as they try to unpick the exact link to climate change. A warming world could reduce levels of Antarctic sea ice, but the current dramatic reduction could also be due to local weather conditions or ocean currents, explains Dr. Caroline Holmes at the British Antarctic Survey. She emphasises it is not just a record being broken, it is being smashed by a long way. This is nothing like anything we've seen before in July. It's 10% lower than the previous low, which is huge. She calls it another sign that we don't really understand the pace of change. Scientists believe that global warming would affect Antarctic sea ice at some point, but until 2015, it bucked the global trend for other oceans, Dr. Holmes says. You can say that we've fallen off the cliff, but we don't know what's at the bottom of the cliff here. I think this has taken us by surprise in terms of the speed of which has happened. It's definitely not the best case scenario that we are looking at, it's closer to the worst case. We can certainly expect more and more of these records to break as the year goes on and we enter 2024. But it would be wrong to call what is happening a climate collapse or runaway warming, cautions Dr. Otto. We are in a new era, but we still have time to secure a livable future for many, she explains. Spain's election on Sunday is provoking political tremors even before polls open. The most likely government to emerge, most analysts predict, will be a coalition including a hard-right nationalist party for the first time in Spain since the death of fascist dictator Francisco Franco in 1975. More left-leaning Spaniards are frantically texting contacts, urging them to make sure to vote, despite the heat and it being holiday time for many to stop the fascists in their tracks. The political right, meanwhile, has said voters have a choice. Sanchez, the current centre-left Prime Minister, and his coalition, including the far-left or Spain, implying that under another Sanchez government, the country will crumble. The rhetoric this election season has been toxic, with voters becoming increasingly polarised. It's a fight over values, traditions, and about what being Spanish should mean in 2023. This kind of heated identity debate isn't peculiar to Spain. Think of Italy, France, Brazil, or the post-Trumpian debate in the US. But Spain was already divided. It has been since the Civil War in the 1930s and the following 4 decades of dictatorship under General Franco. To this day, there's never been an open debate here about victims and aggressors. Old wounds still fester. The hard-right, centre-right coalition represents a return to the past, to neo-Francoism. Ximo Puig, the former centre-left president of Valencia region, told them at the end of a campaign rally for Prime Minister Sanchez's centre-left PSOE party on Friday night. Liberal values like gay marriage, Spain was one of the first European countries to legalise it, or the freedom for people to decide their gender, all of that is endangered. Mr. Puig lost his job this week after a new Valencia government of the centre-right PP and hard-right Vox party was sworn in, following recent regional elections. Many in Spain believe Valencia is a weather vane for the wider country. The Vice President of Valencia is now a retired bullfighter from Vox, Vicente Barrera. He's also an apologist for the Franco regime. To celebrate summer in Spain's third largest city, there have been bullfights every night in Valencia's packed arena. Women throw flowers and fans in appreciation at the colourfully dressed bullfighters below as they tease and taunt their horned opponent, and a brass band plays to the crowd's cries of Ole. Vox was busy electioneering just outside the arena, playing a recording on loudspeaker loop of party leader Santiago Abascal, promising to make Spain great again. Most Vox activists refused to speak to them, but pensioner Paco was seen to share his thoughts. Vox defends family values and other traditions, including bullfighting. He mentioned, the left call them anti-democratic, but they're the ones who don't respect democracy. They want us not to exist. They can't even walk into a lefty neighbourhood of Valencia wearing a shirt with a Spanish flag on it, 22-year-old Eloy added. If I do, people shout "Fascia fascists" at me. It's not nice. Divisions here are so febrile, they're almost tribal. Many voters identify themselves by the pulsera, the ribbon they wear around their wrist. Yellow and red coloured ones representing the flag of Spain are a sign of belonging to the right. Rainbow colours stand for LGBTQ plus rights and are also a symbol for the left. All part of what many Spanish commentators describe as the current footballisation of politics here. But that risks trivialising how deeply many Spaniards feel about their preferred value set, or how threatened they believe those values are by the other side. They met Nieves feeling disenfranchised at Valencia's vibrant central market, where she now works. She says Spain may be doing better economically under Pedro Sanchez, but the country's poorest weren't benefiting. This isn't now about choosing the extreme right, it's about extreme necessity. Salaries of hard-working people don't allow you to pay your bills. I was paid €4 an hour for years when I worked as a cleaner. I'm saying all this as a worker, a mother and as a housewife. Let's see what happens after Sunday's vote. Nieves' sentiments are clear, but the percentage of Spaniards now saying they can live within their means has risen during Pedro Sanchez's time in government. Employment figures have gone up. Spain has one of the lower inflation rates in Europe. Mr. Sanchez got the EU to allow Spaniards to pay less for gas used to make electricity. He has raised Spain's profile internationally with strong support for Ukraine in its fight back against Russia. So how come the anti-Sanchez attacks by the far right fall on such fertile ground? A question has been put to Science and Innovation Minister Diana Morant, formerly a local mayor in Valencia region. We've seen the resurgence of the far right across Europe, she said. The right we have in Spain is not a moderate right. It uses the arguments of hate and tries to dehumanise our leader, the Prime Minister. While we were busy governing, they were spreading lies, but the people of Spain know what we stand for. Lies cannot win over truth. At EU HQ in Brussels, there are huge concerns about a resurgence of hard-right nationalist parties across Europe. Esteban González Pons is from Valencia. He's a bigwig for the centre-right PP nationwide and in the European Parliament. They asked him if he was concerned it could damage his party's and Spain's reputation to jump into a coalition with Vox. I got the pretty snappy response, I can't tell you. Brussels isn't at all worried if my party ends up with a governing arrangement with Vox. There are all sorts of right-wing governments in the EU now. Look at Italy, Sweden, Finland and Austria. Actually, he added, the UK government is more right-wing than Vox, so thank you for the BBC for that question. But what Brussels really wants is not to have any more communists in the government in Spain. This election is a story of two Spains. The face this country wakes up with after Sunday's election will be radically different depending on who wins. Each side claims the other threatens Spaniards' identity and future. But they can't help wondering, considering the record temperatures and drought there, why the parties and Spanish voters haven't concentrated more in the lead-up to Sunday's election on a very real existential crisis for Spain. Climate change. Greece is bracing for more intense heat this weekend, with meteorologists warning that temperatures could climb as high as 45 centigrade or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. People have been advised to stay at home, and tourist sites, including Athens, Ancient and Acropolis, will be shut during the hottest parts of the next 2 days. It could turn into Greece's hottest July weekend in 50 years, one of the country's top meteorologists has said. Meanwhile, firefighters are continuing to battle dozens of wildfires. Emergencies and civil protection officials are warning of a very high risk of new blazes across the country. Western Attica, just west of Athens, is among the worst hit areas, along with Laconia in the southern Peloponnese and the island of Rhodes. Greece's EU partners have provided help, including firefighting planes from France and Italy, and more than 200 firefighters from Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Bulgaria. Neighbouring Turkey is also sending some aircraft to help. Greece, like a number of other European countries, saw a prolonged spell of extreme heat earlier this month. The latest heatwave comes at one of the busiest times for the country's tourism industry. In its latest bulletin, the Hellenic National Meteorological Service, HNMS, warns that central and eastern regions of Greece are likely to see temperatures reaching 44 centigrade on Saturday, and it forecasts an even hotter Sunday, with 45 degrees possible in central Greece. This weekend risks being the hottest registered in July in the past 50 years, said Panagiotis Giannopoulos, a meteorologist with state broadcaster ERT, quoted by AFP news agency. Athens is going to have temperatures above 40 centigrade for 6 to 7 days through to the end of July, he added. After a slight drop on Monday, a new heat surge is expected on Tuesday. Officials fear this could be the worst heatwave since the summer of 1987, when hundreds of deaths were linked to the extreme weather. Across Greece, a number of people have already lost their homes to wildfires. In one region, several villages have been consumed by the blazes. One man told the BBC he did not even have a bed to sleep on anymore, and was now living in a hotel. Climate change increases the risk of the hot, dry weather that is likely to fuel wildfires. The world has already warmed by about 1.1 centigrade since the industrial era began, and temperatures will keep rising unless governments around the world make steep cuts to carbon emissions. Spain and Italy are among the Mediterranean countries which have also experienced intense heat this week, while parts of the US are also seeing records broken. It was the middle of the night when the phone call came. Gazelle Shamad was woken up by her mother, who told her that her father, Jamshid, was calling from his jail cell in Iran. Gazelle hadn't been allowed to talk to her father, an Iranian-German businessman, for 2 years. We didn't even know if he'd already been executed, and they hadn't told us, she told them from her home in Los Angeles a few days later. Iran sentenced Jamshid Shamad to death last February for so-called corruption on earth, a vague catch-all term the Iranian regime uses for any expression of opposition. Amnesty International condemned his trial as a sham. His daughter was overjoyed to talk to her dad again, but she is tormented by the fear that this phone call was allowed in order for her to say goodbye before his execution. For almost 3 years, the 68-year-old has been in solitary confinement in an Iranian jail, cut off from the world. During the 1-hour phone conversation, his daughter suddenly realized he hadn't even been told about his death sentence. Earlier this month, Giselle Shamad launched a criminal complaint here in Germany, calling on German state prosecutors to investigate 8 high-ranking members of the Iranian judiciary and intelligence service for crimes against humanity because of the way her father has been treated. Her father has lost his teeth, either through malnutrition or violence, so he can't eat. He can't walk or talk properly because he suffers from Parkinson's and is not being given his correct medication. They're killing him softly in solitary confinement in this death cell, but even if he survives that, they're killing him by hanging him from a crane in public, she said. They want a public execution for my dad to send out this message of terror, that anybody who speaks out against the regime, we can do this to you. Look at this person that's hanging there. Jamshid Shamad was born in Iran, grew up in Germany, and has dual nationality. He worked as an engineer for Siemens before setting up his own tech business in the US in the early 2000s. It was only when he became the target of an Iranian hacking attack that he started publicly voicing his opposition to the Iranian government. Then 3 years ago, while on a layover in Dubai during a business trip, he was abducted and taken to an Iranian jail. The list of accusations became endless, from spying for the Americans, the British and the Germans to numerous supposed terror attacks. German and EU politicians say the charges are bogus. Even in Iran, you can't sentence someone for terrorism without proof, said Gazelle Shamad, which is why the death sentence is for corruption on earth. Gazelle, who grew up in Germany and is now an intensive care nurse in the United States, has long campaigned for her father's release, but says she got little support from the German government. That is why she launched her criminal complaint, using the principle of universal jurisdiction to target senior officials in Iran's judiciary and intelligence. This enables crimes against humanity or war crimes to be prosecuted anywhere in the world, regardless of where the crimes were committed. Gazelle Shamad's German lawyer, Patrick Croker, of the European Centre for Constitutional and Human Rights, used this principle last year to prosecute a former official of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad for torture and murder committed in Syria. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in Germany. Mr. Crocker believes such cases can act as a deterrent and prevent human rights abuses because perpetrators can't be sure they won't be arrested as soon as they travel. High-level government officials are used to having a lifestyle that enables them to visit the niece who's studying in Paris or go skiing in Sweden. And this is not possible anymore, at least they cannot be secure of that, he said. But it's not clear how the Iranian authorities will respond, and Ghazal Shamad still fears that her father could be executed at any minute. Germany has the largest Iranian diaspora in Europe, but Iranian Germans tell them they feel ignored by the German government. At a protest at Berlin's Brandenburg Gate, they met Alina, an Iranian German who was impressed by Ghazal Shamad's dedication to free her father. It brings tears to my eyes and I get goosebumps when I think of how Ghazal is fighting for her dad, Alina said. Like many people they spoke to, she didn't want her full name or photograph to be published because of fears that she or her family will be targeted by Iran. But she was outraged by what she regarded as a lack of political support for Jamshid Shamad, and that has left her feeling vulnerable too. Despite being a German citizen, Alina believes that if the same thing happened to her or anyone in her family, the German government would not help. I know my country doesn't have my back, I'm alone. Some Iranian Germans suspect racism, asking whether Mr. Shamad is not seen as a real German citizen, despite having grown up here. Others accuse Berlin of prioritizing trade over human rights. I put those allegations to the German Foreign Office, which replied that Foreign Ministry Annalena Baerbock had repeatedly stated that the death sentence was absolutely unacceptable. The German government sees the death sentence as a massive violation of the rights of a German citizen, the statement said. It also pointed out that Iran views Mr. Shamad exclusively as an Iranian citizen and refuses Germany diplomatic access. They continue to advocate for Mr. Shamad with the utmost effort, at a high level through all available channels and at every opportunity. Carrying out the death sentence would have serious consequences, but the Iranian German community remains frustrated. Many feel threatened and persecuted by Iran, but not necessarily protected by Germany either, just forgotten. US President Biden has chosen a female admiral to lead the US Navy, the first time a woman has been nominated to head a Pentagon military service branch. Lisa Franchetti is a former head of the US 6th Fleet and US Naval Forces in South Korea, and has also served as an aircraft carrier strike commander. Her nomination by Mr. Biden must still be confirmed by the US Senate. One lawmaker is currently blocking the Senate from confirming military leaders to protest a military abortion policy. If confirmed as Chief of Naval Operations, she will be the first woman to become a member of the elite group of senior military officers who make up the Joint Chiefs of Staff. A 38-year-old veteran, she was only the second woman to achieve the rank of 4-star admiral. In a statement, Mr. Biden hailed what he called her extensive expertise in both the operational and policy arenas, and said she will again make history when she is confirmed for the role. According to reports in US media, Adam Franchetti was not the first choice of the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who instead recommended Top Gun graduate Samuel Papero as the next Navy chief. Mr. Biden also promoted Adam Papero, nominating him to become the commander of the US military forces in the Pacific. The US Coast Guard is currently led by a woman, Admiral Linda Fagan, but that military branch falls under the Department of Homeland Security rather than the Department of Defense. Adam Franchetti is due to take up the position in the fall when the current chief's 4-year term expires, but she will begin the job in an acting capacity, as it's unlikely that she'll be quickly confirmed by the dividend Senate. Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville is currently blocking the Senate from confirming more than 270 military promotions over a Pentagon policy that pays the travel expenses of service members who have to go out of state to have an abortion. In a statement, Mr. Biden criticized the senator, saying what Senator Tuberville is doing is not only wrong, it is dangerous. He added, he is risking our ability to ensure that the United States Armed Forces remain the greatest fighting force in the history of the world, and his Republican colleagues in the Senate know it. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has signed an order to tighten gun controls in a bid to halt a surge in firearm ownership. Under Lula's far-right predecessor, Jair Bolsonaro, there was an almost seven-fold rise in registered users. Limits will be placed on stockpiles of guns and ammunition, while certain weapons, including 9mm handguns, will be prohibited. The new controls fulfill a campaign promised by Lula. The president blamed a wave of political violence during last year's presidential election on looser gun controls. "We will continue to fight for fewer weapons in our country. Only the police and the army must be well armed," Lula said while unveiling the new stricter measures. The announcement comes after several recent school shootings in a country that registered more than 5 murders per hour on average in 2022, according to the Public Security Forum, an NGO. Brazil has almost 800,000 registered gun owners, up from less than 120,000 in 2018, when Mr. Bolsonaro was elected, according to the 2023 Brazilian Yearbook of Public Security. The country has no constitutional right to bear arms, but under an executive decree passed by Mr. Bolsonaro in 2019, Brazilians were entitled to own up to 4 guns, while others were granted permissions to carry loaded firearms in public under certain conditions. The decree also raised the amount of ammunition people could buy from 50 to 5,000 cartridges for permitted weapons and end up to 1,000 cartridges for use in restricted weapons. The new restrictions will see a registered hunter granted permission to own 6 weapons instead of the previous 30, including up to 15 restricted firearms. It is one thing for a citizen to have a gun at home for protection and assurance, but we cannot allow there to be arsenals of weapons in people's hands, Lula said in his speech. Supervision of civilian weapons is being transferred from the army to Brazil's federal police after criticism of weak oversight. Gun owners who bought their weapons under Mr. Bolsonaro will not be forced to give them up, but a buyback program could start this year. Mr. Bolsonaro argues that guns make Brazil safer, pointing to a lower murder rate during his time in office. The former president has been barred from running for office for 8 years after being found guilty of abusing his power ahead of last year's presidential poll. He had been accused of undermining Brazilian democracy by falsely claiming that the electronic ballots used were vulnerable to hacking and fraud. The bitterly fought election went into a runoff on the 30th of October and was won by a narrow margin by Lula. Mr. Bolsonaro never publicly acknowledged his defeat and left Brazil for Florida 2 days before Lula was sworn in as president. The former president's supporters, who refused to accept the outcome of the election, stormed Brazil's Congress, the presidential palace, and the building housing the Supreme Court on the 8th of January. Tony Bennett was singing at his piano just days before he died, his representatives have revealed. The legendary New York pop and jazz singer died on Friday, aged 96. A statement posted on his Twitter account said, "Tony left us today, but he was still singing the other day at his piano, and his last song was Because of You, his first #1 hit. Tony, because of you, we have your songs in our heart forever." Sir Elton John, Carole King, and Hillary Clinton were among those paying tribute to the star on social media. Bennett was known for songs such as The Way You Look Tonight, Body and Soul, and I Left My Heart in San Francisco. He also collaborated with star performers from Lady Gaga to Aretha Franklin and Frank Sinatra, who called him the best singer in the business. During a career that spanned 8 decades, Bennett sold millions of records and won 20 Grammys, including a Lifetime Achievement Award. Bennett's death was confirmed by his publicist Sylvia Weiner in a statement to the Associated Press. She said he died in his hometown of New York. No specific case or cause of death was announced, but Bennett has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2016. Sir Elton John led the tributes on social media, writing in a statement posted on his Instagram that he was so sad to hear of Tony's passing. Without doubt, the classiest singer, man and performer you will ever see. Sir Elton said he's irreplaceable. I loved and adored him. Condolences to Suzanne, Danny and the family.